بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to day 6 of Qur'an Recitation Mastery. In this video, we'll be talking about the forms of Arabic letters. In the previous lessons, we did makharij, then by now I hope you've been able to pronounce letters and then recognize them. The first letter we have alif, then ba, ta, tha, jim, ha, kha, dal, dhal, ra, zay, sin, sheen, صاد, ضاد, طا, ظا, عين, غين, ثا, قاف, كاف, لام, meme, noon, ha, wow, and yeah. The forms of Arabic letters, actually Arabic letters aren't written this way in the Quran. You can either find them in the initial stage, middle stage, or the final stage. The fourth one is the isolated stage, and that's the same thing as this. So for example, in English word, a letter can start a word, a letter can be in the middle of a word, so also a letter can be at the end of a word. So in Arabic also we have that. A letter can start a word, that's the initial stage, then a letter can be at the middle of a word, that's the middle stage, then we have the final stage, which is a letter being at the end of a word. So let's take a look at all these letters and identify them wherever I see them in the Quran. For Alif, we have the initial and the isolated state the same way. And then we have the median stage and also the final stage written the same way. That's because you can't add a letter to the left hand side of alif. You can add a letter to the right hand side, but you can't add it to the left hand side. Meaning, when you start writing in Arabic, you can keep writing, and then when you reach alif, you can join a letter to alif. You can write your alif, but you don't continue writing it. Like you don't continue joining it. When you write your alif like this, you have to stop and then continue. You don't have to join it. So this is the exact way we have it in the Quran. You can't say a letter joined to alif at the left hand side. You can only see a letter or more joined to alif at the right hand side. So we have letter ba. Letter ba is written different ways in the four forms. The first one, we can join a letter. That means we can join a letter to by a letter two or more. It can be a letter, just one. It can be two. It can be three. So we can join a letter two or three to ba, both at the right hand side and at the left hand side. So that's why we have everything differently at the initial stage, at the median stage, and at the final stage. So you have to be able to identify it, like this is ba when you see it at the middle, when you see it at the final stage, and also when you see it at the initial stage. So we have letter ta. Ta is written different ways also, but we have another way of writing ta when it ends a word, and that's called ta marbuta. So we have ta marbut. It's written in either of these two ways. That means when you have a letter that you can join another letter to it at the left hand side, that means it's written this first way, while the second way, it's when you have a letter that you can't join another letter to it at the left hand side. Just as we have alif, you can't join a letter to it at the left hand side. So that's when you write it exactly this way, the second way. So, but the first way, it's when you have, let's say, ba. You can join a letter to ba both at the right hand side and at the left hand side. So that means you have ta marbuto joined to a letter. But when you have it in the second case, that means you can't join a letter to it. You have to write it separately. So you can pronounce it just like the representation in English. We have T, like ta. But in some cases whereby you have to stop there, we'll get to that later, inshallah. It is also regarded to as ha. Like when you want to stop, you pronounce it as ha. For example, when you have Khadijah, Khadijah, what actually ends the word Khadijah or the name Khadijah is ta marbuta. So, but for easy, you can't just say Khadijat. So you have to say Khadijah. So there you represent it with ta marbuta, but the pronunciation will be that of ha. We'll get to that later, inshallah. So that it's also written the same way. You can't write. You can join a letter to tha, both at the right hand side and the left hand side. We have the same thing as jim, ha, kha, dal. But dal, you can't add a letter to it at the left hand side. So that makes both the median and the final stage the same, and also the initial and the isolated the same, because you can't add a letter to it at the left hand side. You can only add a letter to it at the right hand side. That means you can start writing, then you join together with dal, but you don't join a letter to dal. When you keep writing, let's say you want to write ba, dal, and another ba, so you have to join your ba together with dal, but you don't join the second ba together with the dal, because you can't join a letter to dal at the left hand side. So the same thing applies to letter dal, the same thing also applies to letter ra, the same thing applies to letter z. Then we have sin. Sin, you can add a letter to it at the left hand side and at the right hand side. So that makes the whole four forms different. So the same thing applies to this. You can add a letter to it at the right hand side and also at the left hand side. So that makes everything different. You can add a letter to Sad at the right hand side. You can also add a letter to it at the left hand side. So you have it written in different forms. You have to identify them. You have to be able to say this is Sad when you see it in the Quran, whether it's written at the beginning, at the initial stage, median stage, or the final stage. Then also we have Lord. Lord is also the same. You can add the letter to Lord at the beginning, at the right hand side, and also at the left hand side. We have Law. The same thing applies to Law. Then Vo, Ain, Lain, Fa, Qaf, Kaf, Lam, Meme, Noon. The same thing applies to every one of them. Ha. Then we have Wow, Nam. For this wow, you can't add a letter to wow at the left hand side. So then we have ya. So that means we can't add letters to 7 letters at the left hand side. Those letters are Alif, Dal, Zal, Ra, Zay, and Waw. All other letters have different forms in each stage. Then you exercise, write the letters in the 4 forms. That means a letter, you write a letter in the 4 forms. That means you have 28 times 4. So then you open your Quran and try to identify the 4 forms of letters. Like for Alif, try to identify it. Ba, try to identify it. So, but in this way, not just anywhere in the Quran, but try to find it in Surah Al-Fatiha, which is the first chapter of the Quran. You can also try as much as many surahs you like. You can open to Surah Al-Ikhlas, Surah Al-Falaq, Surah Al-Nas, anyone. You can just try to identify them. See you in the next lesson. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. But don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't done that. Like this video, leave